All right, so it is 9 a.m. in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, New York. Ian, where are you now? Are you in Boston or in Florida?
I'm in Washington, D.C., actually.
In Washington, D.C., okay. All right. Yeah, and every other time we talk to you, you are somewhere in Africa. So this time, at least, you're in the United States. But anyway, it is time to start the webinar. And today we have a very special guest. We have Ian Sandler of Forcier Consulting. And the company and the guest are special for several reasons. First, the company has participated in X-Culture several times and is one of our closest, probably the closest partners so far. Not only have they participated in multiple rounds of X-Culture, they have also in person attended one or even several X-Culture events. Notably, the last one last year at the we met in Tampa, Florida, but then spent 4 days aboard a cruise ship. And so they organized a number of sessions, both for the students, but also for the attendees of the conference in general. Second, Forcier is very special because the business model, the product essentially, is inherently international, which makes it a very good fit for X-Culture. When you sell chocolate, or when you sell clothing or shoes or cosmetics, you can sell it domestically, you can sell it internationally, but you don't have to be an international company to be successful. Forcier specializes in a very unique product. They do research for governmental and non-governmental agencies that provide aid and resources for reconstruction and humanitarian aid in all kinds of conflict areas, usually in Africa, but not only in Africa. And so essentially, the transactions are always international. Not to mention that the company itself is very international. It has some employees here in the United States, some in Egypt, some operating all around the African continent, and also on occasions in other parts of the world. And so even though we've had several webinars with Forcier in the past, in fact, if I remember correctly, I think we have had 5 of them before. The company is still developing fairly fast, and so some things have changed. Then the circumstances have changed as well, so the world is changing, and Forcier, as I said, is an inherently global player, and so as the global conditions change, the company's model and practices have to change as well. And then, as I said, it's a complicated model, not complicated, but it's different from a model of a company that just sells a product through stores. And so we felt it would be necessary and beneficial to have yet another introductory webinar where the company will talk a little bit more, or Ian will talk on behalf of the company about the history of the company, the product, the model, as well as a little bit more about the challenge presented to the X-Culture students, what you should focus on, what you should not focus on, perhaps some things we already know, but some we really would like to know. And so that's what we'll do today. And so the way it will go is you can watch passively on YouTube, and I see we have 53 viewers and the number keeps growing. Wonderful. If you would like to ask a question, you can send those questions to admin@xculture.org, and I'm monitoring that email, and if your questions arrive, I will try to read them and transmit them to the presenter. But also feel free to use that long link that I sent to you and join us directly here in the webinar room as a presenter or as a discussant, and engage in the conversation directly with the presenter. So this way we will see your face and you will be able to have a dynamic live discussion. And the only restriction we have is that we can have up to 10 people in the room at the same time. So I may not be able to accommodate every single one at all times. But usually people watch on YouTube and then join only when they have a question. All right, with this introduction, let me turn it back to Ian Sandler, who will start with a short introduction of the company, and then we'll go on to the questions about the challenge, as well as the questions that keep coming via email, and hopefully we will be able to stay within 1 hour. All right, Ian, all yours.
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, thank you for the introduction, Russ. Always happy to participate in X-Culture. I think it's a great program. We've had some incredible reports in the past that have really given us some enlightening information on new markets. So it really is useful for us as well. So Forcier, as Russ said, is a research organization. So we don't do development work. We don't do humanitarian aid. We do research. We define ourselves as research, monitoring, and evaluation. Monitoring is when you are periodically looking at a project. Maybe every week you're going to a site to see how it's doing. Research may be doing a case study, so qualitative interviews with someone to figure out a very specific situation. An evaluation might be seeing how a program did. So we have about 200 staff all over Africa currently, in 7 offices in Africa. So we are in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Mozambique. We have smaller support offices in Egypt and Kenya. And then we have myself in Washington, D.C., not an office, just myself for kind of liaison purposes with the U.S. government. And we have a back-end financial admin office in Tampa, Florida. So Forcier, again, it's a research firm. We are working with NGOs, nonprofits, government agencies. Our typical clients are the UN agencies such as UNICEF, UNHCR, UNDP, World Food Program, things like that. We work with NGOs like Save the Children, World Vision, Oxfam. We work with governments like USAID. We work with DFID, the British government, JICA, the Japanese government, BTC, the Belgian. So we're working with all of them. And we do a little bit of private sector work in terms of telecommunications firms, someone like TNS or Nielsen. We do work with them as well. But 99% of our work is in the development and humanitarian aid sector. So as I said, we provide research, and that can be, like I mentioned, evaluations, how a project is doing. So an organization like UNICEF will do a program on water and sanitation. Forcier will come in and interview 1,000 people in the community at the end of the project to see if there was any real change and what we could attribute that change to. We are also doing media studies, where we try and find out the classic demographic of a radio show listeners. We are doing market research where we go into, rural markets in Mogadishu, and we try and find out what the price of tomatoes is, what skills are needed in the market, things like that. So classically, we are doing data collection, where we're actually going, interviewing people, collecting the data on smartphones, where we're inputting all the surveys. We're doing technical design, where we design all of our surveys, and then analysis, where we're analyzing some of these surveys. So again, Forcier, we have offices in these 8 countries, but we are working all over the world. So we've worked in 26 countries to date. That includes in the Middle East, in places like Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. We are also in all different regions of Africa. So North Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa. And we even did a project for Handicap International in Laos and Vietnam. So we are incredibly interested in markets all over the world. But the one thing, I guess, to keep in mind there, which we'll go into a little bit later, is that Forcier's specialty is working in logistically complicated places. So there's nowhere on earth like South Sudan. South Sudan is, an incredibly difficult place to work in for many different reasons. So that's what makes Forcier unique. We are experts at mitigating challenges. So for us, we're not interested in working in Canada, let's say. There are lots of, research firms that work in America and Canada and France. We're interested in working in places where many people, are not working. So yeah, I think that's, a bit of the basic spiel.
So if I have to put it in plain language, as I understand, the way it works is like this. A war or a conflict happens somewhere. Let's say, for example, South Sudan splits into 2 countries, bloody mess. Somebody provides money for reconstruction, somebody sends food, somebody sends aid, but then after spending millions and millions of dollars, they would like to know, the donors would like to know if that money has been put to good use. And so somebody needs to go there and literally do a research on the ground to see if the bridge was built, if the food reached the people, or something of that kind. And obviously it's a dangerous place, and not everybody can go there, and plus not everybody can do the job. You have to have people with research degrees, with a PhD or master's degree and so on. And that's when they come to you and you do all that work. You go there, you do the research. Is that how it works?
Well, 2 things. So one, we wouldn't typically classify a conflict zone as something that has just had a war. So, conflict in terms of physical conflict is, one part of it. But absolutely not all of the places that we work have conflict like that. So primarily, you know, we say we work in post-conflict zones, but, you know, logistically challenging can mean many different things. In Mozambique, that means drought. So there is extreme drought. In Somalia, while there is physical conflict, famine is one of the worst things that's happening. So conflict and logistically complicated can also mean things like it's just very difficult to work there. So for example, the Gambia, it's extremely difficult to work there because the government is very protective of their data and opinion polling. So it's very difficult to get approvals and permissions to conduct research because the government is so involved in every aspect. So we don't want to limit it just to wars, let's say. Also, so what you just described is going in, verifying if a bridge has been built, if 1,000 vaccines has actually been transported to a hospital. That's one service that we do. That's called third-party monitoring is what it's called. It's when you're hired to verify and monitor if things actually happened as they said were happening. But we're doing lots of other kind of research. So it could be at the beginning. So before a program has even happened, we are assessing what a community's perceptions are like. So let's say Oxfam is going into Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they're going to do a program on nutrition, school feeding, and healthy dietary habits. We're going to go in and we're going to interview 1,000 people in Kinshasa, which would be representative of the population there in Kinshasa. And we're going to find out, what are they eating right now? What are their hand washing practices? You know, what are some of their exercise? So that in 2 years, when the project is over, we can compare it to that. And that's called a baseline.
So that could be also general market research, as well as research for the best ways to spend the money even before it's spent, or a before and after type of assessment if some humanitarian aid goes into the country. So it's much more broader, it's just in the challenging areas, right?
You know, we generally say if it involves collection of data or analysis of any type, we're doing it. But that can be at any type or any part in a project's life cycle. It can be on an incredible variety of sectors. So we do research on peace building, on nutrition, on water and sanitation, media, things like that.
Now, I know these questions, I have a few questions about the company that may not be directly related to the challenge as far as what the students have to answer, but it may be helpful for them to understand before they start working on the challenge. Yeah. Employees, how many, where do they work, and who are they?
Sure. So we have 200 staff right now. Those 200 staff are almost exclusively in our 7 offices in Africa. So we have maybe 5 to 10 in America, either in DC or in Tampa, but the other 190 are in our offices. So 85% of our staff are national researchers from the places that we're working. So that means that 85% of our staff are Somalian researchers or Congolese researchers or Mozambique research staff. So Forcier is unique in that we try to combine the awesome and expert local contextual knowledge of people from the countries that we're working with the very different perspectives of international expertise. So we often have national researchers, as in, you know, Somali senior researchers, teamed with international methodologists, statisticians, analysts, and they work together. So in terms of what, you know, differentiates us, that is a huge add for us and something you should consider in your reports as well. You know, Forcier is very different because we have a permanent presence in these places, a permanent presence in these places, but we combine that with international expertise. Whereas a lot of our competitors are either international firms that are based in London or DC. They fly into a place for a week or two and leave. They're very smart, they understand research, but they don't know anything about the country like we do. On the other side, there are qualified local firms. So maybe you have a really great Malian firm. They're, you know, 100% Malian. They're great at collecting data, but they probably do not have the same capacity to write English reports, to provide, you know, high level analysis on programs. That kind of thing is very different. So that's traditionally who we go against.
So and the employees, are they all researchers, all PhDs, masters, or some of them are just regular support staff?
Oh no, I mean all of our researchers, some of them have bachelor's degrees, some of them less. Keep in mind the education systems in these countries is far less developed than in many other parts of the world. So many of our researchers have bachelors. Our research officers, so those are the people that coordinate projects. They often provide the analysis, they manage the logistics. They're kind of the point of contact for the client. They usually at minimum have a master's degree. Our methodologists, our statisticians, are really high level analysis capacity. Those are usually PhDs, and those may be based either in Nairobi or here in DC.
And so your employees, are they safe? I know you have a big office in Cairo, Egypt, which is probably fine, even though they did have some turbulence not so many years ago. But the ones in Somalia, the ones in Congo, do you have to provide like bodyguards or some protection, or are they fine working, just showing up at the office in the morning?
So we, we stay in compounds in many of the places in Somalia, in South Sudan, in DRC. We do have compounds. Those have guards outside. They're all very safe. The precautionary measures, of course. As a lot of you will know, there's, as much, if not more violence in the United States than there are in many of our countries. I always, tell people to keep that kind of frame in mind. So for us, they are safe. The most unsafe parts of these countries are often outside of the capitals.
Right.
And that's not where our international staff are going. So the reason that we're able to access so much of the country is because we're sending people from their own communities back to their communities. So we're having a Somali researcher that is originally from Mogadishu train in our office in Somaliland in Hargeisa, go back to Mogadishu while he's interviewing his peers. So it's a lot better as it is someone that has the same linguistic capacity, the same cultural background, and they're not, flanked by bodyguards, as that would just arise more suspicion and be more unsafe. So, our areas are very, very safe, but we also put, quite a few measures in to mitigate that risk.
Yeah. I know you go to Africa on a regular basis, so when you are traveling through Africa, do you have to have some sort of additional protection, or you just show up at the office?
I usually show up at the office, as I'm usually staying in the capital, taking meetings in the capital, and for the most part, they're incredibly safe locations. You have to be smart and you have to keep your wits about you. The number one cause of death of foreigners abroad is road accidents. So
Well, yeah.
Two
more questions about employees. They just came. One from Cameron Alexander. He's asking if you ever have done any work in Iraq, and or planning to do, or would be open to this idea.
Great question. Absolutely looking to explore it. So we have not done work in Iraq. We've done in the Middle East. We've done work in Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Egypt, and one project in Damascus. But we're very, very interested in Iraq. Vas, would it be a good time now to talk a little bit about our strategic direction as a company?
Sure. Just one more question about the employment, and I got like 8, but one is interesting from Lauren McPherson. She's asking, what do employees do in Washington, D.C. and Tampa?
So in Washington, D.C., we have only a few. On the business development side, and I probably should have prefaced by explaining who I am. I am the Director of Business Development for Forcier. So I manage our business development efforts across the globe, as well as our individual business development officers in each of our country that handle procurements regionally. So I'm here in DC managing that team across our offices. I'm also here to liaise with the US government, with headquarters organizations. A lot of the policy, larger projects are formulated here in DC. So I'm here to be a part of that. We have a few of our senior methodologists, our PhDs, and our higher level quality experts and analysts are here in DC, just a few. In Tampa, we have some of our HR, finance, and administrative support staff that are working globally to support all of our country offices.
So your job is basically you talk to the governments and the donors on behalf of the organization, right?
Yes, on behalf. So usually what I'm doing is I'm trying to sell Forcier as a research partner. So there may be a $50 million program that's coming out in the Democratic Republic of Congo to work with adolescent girls and education. I will then try and partner with an education firm, you know, an organization, maybe an NGO or a private firm that is looking to do education programming, and I will try and come in as the research partner. So Forcier will handle all of the evaluations, all of the research for this program, while the other organization, the education one, will focus on programming. So it's very strategic. You know, it's like a game of chess where you're trying to pick the right partners, the right consortium that can then bid for these large opportunities and win. So that's a little bit of my role.
And you said strategic direction. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so again, you know, Forcier, we started 6 years ago, very new. I started at Forcier 3 years ago. When I started at Forcier 3 years ago, Forcier was only working in Somalia and South Sudan. We probably had 60 staff total. Again, now we've worked in 26 countries. We've done 450 projects. We've done, as I said, 26 countries worth of things, quite a lot. It's really expanded quickly. So a little bit about how we work. Our offices are not only country offices, they're also regional hubs. So we are working from Mozambique in our office in Maputo. We do projects all over Mozambique. But from that base, it's also our Southern Africa hub. So we're able to work in Zambia and Zimbabwe and Malawi and South Africa. It's an easy, accessible distance for us to work in. So
I assume you hardly ever have two projects that are exactly in the same place geographically. It would be at least different parts of the country, I assume, right?
Oh, no, you know, I would say at any given time, Forcier is doing 30 to 40 projects globally. Many of our projects happen in the same place. Unfortunately, all of our data is usually owned by the organization that is contracting us. So what that means is that we may be contracted by 8 different organizations to do the same kind of survey in the same place at varying levels of time, because we're not allowed to share our data with other people. Now that's, you know, really a flaw in the development industry in terms of a lack of sharing and collaboration, but we often are doing projects in the same place. So we are working in these kind of regions. That means that from Southern Africa, we're covered from Mozambique. In East Africa, we're working from Kenya, as well as South Sudan. The Horn of Africa from Somalia. We are working in Francophone Africa from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So all over West and Central Africa, we're usually working from there. We're working in the Middle East and North Africa from our office in Egypt. But we're particularly interested in 2 things at this moment in time, as you'll see throughout your research. Francophone Africa and the rest of West Africa is extremely exciting right now in terms of opportunity, as well as the Middle East. Now, when you think about why are these opportunities coming about, you really need to think about what's happening in the world. So Forcier, you know, is going where there is a need for research. Where is there low capacity? So there is not qualified research firms, there's not qualified individuals, and where is there a need for data? Where is development happening, but they have no idea what's actually happening on the ground? Where do they need people to get it? So when you think about West Africa, there is increasing concern with counterterrorism, things like that in what's called the Sahel, which is Chad and Niger and Cameroon, northern Nigeria. These are big priorities, especially of the US government. So as the US government and its current administration tones down its funding for maternal health and things like that, they're increasing funding for things related to counterterrorism. So the US gives $1 billion per year to Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania. The reason that we give $1 billion a year is not purely altruistic. It's to foster relationships, to provide a buffer from insurgencies in places like Somalia to the east. So we're looking at places based on where opportunities are, which is where funding comes from. And that funding comes from the political, economic, and social climate of the country.
There is a very interesting question from Molly. She's saying that Africa is projected to become basically what China has been the last 20 years. So Africa, that's where most of the economic growth will be happening. And yes, that's, you know, every study shows that huge population, untapped resources, and virtually no business, huge economic growth. Now, you're talking about research in Africa primarily from the perspective of humanitarian aid and reconstruction and kind of governmental / non-governmental types of funding. But theoretically, at least, you're uniquely positioned to do research on that continent for corporate partners. Are you open to the idea of doing some research for companies, like for example, Ford Motor Company or food companies and whatever else? So purely business research.
So two things I would say there. Yes, we are open to it, but I don't want it to be a focus of anyone's reports. So we're interested in it. We've done it. We've done, perception surveys for Pepsi. We've done them for Johnny Walker, many, many years ago. They're of interest, but they're not our primary concern. And that's for a few reasons. One, there are very qualified market research firms out there. And I have to stress, there's a difference between a market research firm and a development or social research firm. So doing social research takes a very different skill set in terms of the analysis, the design. It's much more rigorous on the methodological design. Market research is much more limited, usually only in capitals. It's very simple analysis. Well, probably not. I don't want to put it like that, but it's different. It's different types of analysis. So there are tons and tons and tons of market research firms all over Africa, and even some of the most impoverished countries. There are not as many social development companies. So that's to say, our competition is much more fierce with market research. So you may think, oh, well, I should recommend that Forcier works with Ford in Kenya. But if you look, there are 30 extremely high qualified market research firms in Kenya that already work with Ford. Now, are there any research firms that are able to provide social humanitarian analysis and research in rural parts of Kenya? Not as much. So, you have to think a little bit of what our primary market and what our niche is. But yes, we're interested in exploring it. And it's definitely a added benefit of a location, but it cannot be the primary motive to move into a market.
And so your motivations, as I understand, obviously competition and areas of expertise, but is it also dictated by your desire to, let's call it, save the world, or just purely economic decision to stay in the niche where there is less competition? So are you, in a sense, altruistic and trying to help those countries, or is it just simply a business opportunity for you, or both? It's
a great question. I would argue that no company is ever entirely altruistic. Anybody that says they are is lying. In the end, we are a private sector company. We have shareholders. We have 200 employees to take care of. Our commitment is to our staff as well. But we are absolutely invested in the places that we work, and the places that we choose do come from our mission. And our mission is to provide a sustainable, lasting technical research industry in that country. So we absolutely we're not looking to, let's say, set up an office in Ghana, although Ghana may have opportunities, because Ghana is much more developed and has great research capacity there. Well, we would do projects there, but it's not of interest to set up a permanent base. All of the places that we work, there's a noticeable lack of an industry for research. And the reason that's the thing that separates us from all of our competitors is that we are not sitting somewhere nice and cushy, minus myself, and flying down to these places and then leaving while contributing nothing to a sustainable, lasting impact in that country. We're setting up and looking to set up offices where we can grow our 85% national staff. So to be quite frank and blunt, we are not looking to have a company of white neo-colonialists setting up shop in a country and running things, as you will, like many other countries do. Our goal and our mission is to build offices, build places where it is eventually entirely run by nationals of that place who know their country best. The one thing to remember always for Forcier is the thing we trust most is people from that place. If you want to know what's happening in a place, ask someone from that place. It seems like such an obvious, intuitive reaction, but it's not these days. So I would say that we are motivated by an economic opportunity that can support ourselves and support our efforts, no escaping that in business, but we're also motivated by what places could use it and where is there the most potential for building that industry.
Yeah. I'll say from myself, and maybe I'm a little biased, my master's degree was in program evaluation. So basically when the government does something or when a company does something, somebody needs to evaluate how effective that intervention was. Mm-hmm. And so looking at Forcier and remembering, Ian, you mentioned Pepsi. So there are many business opportunities in Africa, but somebody sells sugar water and somebody helps with money to reconstruct the country, and then somebody does evaluation of that effectiveness of that effort. And so if I had to choose what company I work for, I would go with the research company that does a novel thing that will hopefully help the continent, as opposed to just simply sell sugar water and caffeine.
And that's extremely important. Is you're right. That is another big reason why we don't focus on market research. Is
Right.
that we are data nerds. We truly believe in the power of data. That our mission is to provide evidence responsive programming. So we think that the development and humanitarian world is an extremely lucrative business. And don't be mistaken, it is a business. The U.S. government alone gives $15 billion a year in international aid. That aid, again, is not altruistic at all. It is very targeted and has very targeted means. The contractors that work in the development sphere, they're working there as businesses as well, because there's a lot of money to be made in it. But for us, we want to influence those development contractors. We want to change their programming. So a lot of the times people will say, okay, we're going to bring 1,000 canoes to this community to help them fish. And we go, do you know if there's a river there? Have you actually done the research to see if they need canoes? Or are you just thinking this because that's something that you've devised from your office in London? So we want to make sure that this money is spent the best, because again, this is our money. It's taxpayer dollars. We want to do it by informing their decisions with data. So that's why we primarily work in development and not market research. As you said, it doesn't have the same goal or mission for us.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. All right, so let's go directly into the questions that the students will be working on, and clarify what exactly each of those questions mean, as well as what exactly you're interested in, and perhaps maybe something that you may not be interested in.
Yep.
So we have 3 blocks, and the first block is all about the market. So essentially this first block, the first 2 weeks, the team will have to figure out how the humanitarian aid industry, if I can call it that way, works around the world, and then where the opportunities are, and then try to find one most promising new market for Forcier, and analyze that market in terms of who operates there, what's the competition, what's going on there, things like that. So main competitors, languages spoken, religion, customs, and all those other things. So can you talk about first other specific regions that you're interested in? And you already mentioned Africa. Are you open to going to other markets? As well as what exactly the student should focus on when they're trying to understand the industry as well as a specific market?
Sure. So I'm open to anything you can sell me on. If you can convince me that Mongolia is a good market for us, and you have the evidence and the data, again, I want you to do exactly what we're doing as a company. Our goal is to convince implementers to use data to, make their decisions. I want you to do the same thing. So if you can convince me that a place is logical through all of these steps that we've outlined, then absolutely go for it. If you can't do some of these steps, then you shouldn't suggest it. So that's why we've organized it the way that we have, because some of the things that we choose to look at first are some of our most important highlighters of, is this a viable market? So I'm absolutely interested in Southeast Asia. I'm very interested in, parts of South Asia. I'm interested in parts of, Eastern Europe, the Middle East. If there are things in South America.
There is a question from Icon Samato. He's asking about Caucasus, well, basically the former Soviet republics of Georgia, now Chechnya, and all those countries. Are you interested in that region as well, Caucasian?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, these reports are extremely valuable and should teach me something that I don't know. So if you can show it, absolutely. Now, I would say, though, there's a reason that we have worked and are working in the places that we're working, and there's a reason that we haven't worked in some other places. So keep it in mind, Eastern Europe, there's a lot of opportunity, as we know, lots of, money on reconstruction, things like that. There is a need, but there are also high capacity firms, not only in the places, but also very close by. It is much more advantageous for a firm from London or Paris to work in Ukraine than it is for us, in our locations. So you have to think about accessibility given our current locations right now.
Right.
Would we set up an office straight out of Ukraine? Is that feasible? Is that a smart move? I'm not sure. Would we start, the good thing about the Middle East is that let's say you chose Lebanon as your project. You could suggest, and we could first, take one-off projects from our office in Egypt. So going over there, coming back, going over there, coming back, but not having to set up the permanent overheads and infrastructure of an office. As we built up more experience in a portfolio, we could then do an office there. That's a great kind of expansion model. Rather than just jumping into Honduras and just setting up an office and going there, which is extremely expensive when you don't have any work. Things to consider. So how does it play into our regional portfolio currently? And how would you, think about that kind of expansion model?
Yeah. Now, the second block, and that would be the most important block, the one that the students should commit most of their attention and time to, is, we call it marketing, but essentially Forcier is interested in projects and clients. So the students will be asked to look for ongoing humanitarian and reconstruction aid projects. So basically, what the money goes for, who gives the money, and what is it used for, the timeline and things like that. And then second, potential clients. So basically, who potentially would be interested in hiring a research firm to evaluate either pre and post or some other type of effectiveness of the program. Can you elaborate on, one, what exactly you would be interested in, and two, perhaps some hints and tips as to how to go about it to have the most effective results?
Absolutely. So projects are interesting to a degree as an indication that there is work and opportunity there, not as interesting as I'm going to capitalize on that project. When you think about a project, for the vast majority of the time, they have 3 research-related things related to that project. Their baseline at the beginning, the midline, seeing how it's doing at the middle, and the end line, evaluating the efficacy of the project. So there's only so many opportunities one project can provide, but it's a great indication that there's work. What I always tell my staff is, when we're looking at new countries, you need to be able to find at least 100 potential partners that we could work with that work in the development sphere. That is 100 international NGOs or national NGOs that are doing development programming or humanitarian aid and have a permanent presence in that country. So if you're thinking about somewhere like, I don't know, let's say Panama, are there all the big players there? Is Save the Children there? Is World Vision? Is there Plan International? Is there CARE? These organizations work all over the world. They all tend to work in the same locations because they're doing the same thing we're doing. They're following wherever the funding is. So what I would suggest is to start with the biggest funders. You want to look at the US government. You want to look at DFID, the British government. You want to look at EU and the European Commission. All of their websites are completely transparent on their spending. It shows exactly how many dollars, the different types of programs, the different sectors, even the contractors that they're working with, and what countries they go to. So look on the last couple of years, look on this year, where is that aid being distributed? Where is that money going? And you can often follow that to individual organizations and find those 100 organizations that are working with these donors.
So to find the projects, what would be the exact steps one would take to do research online? Like, what would be the keywords? Would you go to the Red Cross website and just see what they do, or would you use a different type of search strategy?
So first, I would pick a region of interest. Every region in the world is going to have a few countries that may be viable. So, a lot of this may deal with your personal knowledge. It may deal with your preference or your interest in exploring. There's no wrong answer here, only a more convincing argument. So I would first pick a region that you're interested in. But I would also look at the donors and see what regions they're donating to. So once you pick that region, I would just start looking up lists of organizations. So I would try and figure out who are all the international NGOs that work in this space. So actually get a general list of, who does all this work that could contract Forcier. Because remember, our primary clients are people that are doing development work. They hire us to do research on their programs. So we do work a little bit for governments, but not as much yet. Government contracts the organization. Organization contracts Forcier to provide research. So I would find all of these organizations generally, and I would look on their websites and I would see, they all have where we work maps, see which countries they have permanent presence in. Once you've done that, that's when you will start researching Myanmar development organizations 2017. it's often as simple as a Google search. Do not underestimate the power of desk research. And a lot of the time you can write Myanmar development, humanitarian aid, 2017 organizations. Someone somewhere in the world has already put together a list of all the organizations that work in that country. And from there, you go deeper and find out some of their projects, what sectors they're working in, how long they've been there, things like that.
There's a very interesting question from Lee Oliver. The clients, are your clients the actual donors, like, for example, the Red Cross or UNICEF? Or are those the local organizations that use the money from the donors to actually do something on the ground?
Both. So organizations like Red Cross and UNICEF, they're doing their own programming.
So they have their own employees as well?
Oh, yes. They have massive offices, their own programming. Some of their programming is giving money to civil society organizations that do their own work, but a lot of it is just UNICEF staff doing their work. Our biggest client around the world is UNICEF. We work with them in many different countries. I would say 90% of our work is done with individual organizations that have already received funding. They contract us after they're already doing all of their stuff. Then we do a little bit of our work with donor governments. So with the World Bank, with USAID, with DFID and the British government, we contract directly through them. But most of the time, it's donor gives money to an organization that does programming, Save the Children, and Save the Children hires us to evaluate their work.
And when it comes to the actual words that will appear on the paper in the report, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that the students have to be as specific as possible. So ideally, they should provide all the names and contacts and the timeline and the amounts of dollars that go wherever they, whatever project they're researching. And then I assume it would be useful at the beginning of the chapter to perhaps have a bullet list of the projects they found, and then have more detailed multi-page report section where all the additional details are provided. I assume you probably know about many of those organizations and projects. So if you look at that executive summary and you see the names and you know them, maybe there is even no point in reading the rest of that section. But if you see some new name of a project or a potential client that you've never seen it before, I suppose that's when you will go deeper into that report and we'll try to look up all the additional details. Is that how you want to see it, or what's the best way to organize it?
I don't care as much about projects. If you have the organization, that's enough. If you show me that CARE International has an office in Vietnam, I don't care about the projects they're doing because I know all of the projects that they're going to be doing. I know what work they do. It's better to show me the organizations that are in that place and not the actual projects that they're doing. So a list or even a number, you want to be concise in your executive summaries and your summaries. And if you tell me, we have identified 120 potential partners that we believe that work in these following sectors. So within development, we've found 35 that work in agricultural and small business loans. We've found 35 that work in media and peace building. We've found 35 that work in infrastructure and health. That's really great. So I want to know clients more than I want to know projects.
So projects is kind of a prerequisite. That's where they start, but that's only an intermediate step before getting to the clients, which is what you're really interested in.
The project helps the X-Culture student know if the client is viable. So you want to, maybe you've never heard of Save the Children. You're not sure, but you look and you see that they're doing a program on school feeding, where they're going to 150 schools in Vietnam and they're providing school feeding. That project is now an indication that that organization is a great client for Forcier because they're doing development work that we could possibly do research on.
Makes sense. And then finally, the last block is operations management. So analysis of operating costs and related expenses. And so we have here a list of about a dozen points. So once the clients are identified, once we know what the market is, one of the questions or the block of the questions is, what would it take? How much would it cost to put personnel on the ground to do research? And looking at the questions here, we have things from what's the normal daily compensation for the national researchers, what is the per diem, national currency, average price for a hotel room, average price for a transportation for a car, and things like that. Can you elaborate more on what exactly would you need here? Is it something that can be done remotely by Google search, or does it have to be like one of the team members has to be in that country to know all those details? How should students go about it?
No, this is entirely research based on the internet. There's a ton of resources for trying to find out just basic costs. So before we move into a country, we want to try and win a project in that country. We want to have a little bit of a portfolio before we actually go and set up an office. In order to bid on projects in that country, we need to, and my team needs to put together budgets, logistical plans. Having just an idea of what things generally cost conservatively allow us to win those projects and be able to budget for it so that we can then go in and move. So again, it's not necessary to find, the most specific, absolutely perfect information on this, but how much would it cost for someone to feed themselves for a day? How much would it cost for an apartment for a month? That's very important, because in my budget, I'm going to plan for one of our staff members to be over there for a month. If I budget them at $200 a month, but it turns out to be $1,000, I just lost a significant portion of my margin. So I need those initial thoughts. That's really useful. So when it comes to transportation, logistics, moving around, food, those are really important. If you can find salary information, that's great, but it will be very difficult for you to find. So finding out what the average cost for an interviewer or, a researcher in that country, what their daily rate would be, extremely useful for me. It may be difficult. You may have to ask people, you may have to reach out to universities, you may want to reach out to individuals and see what their rates would be. But that would be
you
more
have connections on LinkedIn, for example, or maybe you can find people otherwise and ask.
Sure.
Yeah, my hope is also, and that's talking more to the students, so even though individually you may not find all the answers, or some of your numbers may be a little bit off, the hope is that when we have 1,000, 2,000 students working on this challenge, and each one brings a couple of numbers, and when we aggregate them all together and take an average, chances are that the error will be more random. And so as a result, the average will converge around the true value. And so while the individual estimates may be a little bit less useful, but once you aggregate all the crowd's input, all of a sudden a true picture starts to emerge. Yeah.
One thing that we didn't talk about as much is competition.
Right.
So, competition is incredibly, the two biggest things that I factor into a decision for expansion in market research is clients and competition. Are there the clients that could sustain us, or is there too much competition that we won't be able to get the work? So I really want to know who are competitors, both international and national and individual, and what are their advantages? How do you feel that they're better than Forcier? How do you feel that we could be better than them? If we know that there are no competitors in a country, that's a great indication that we should start working in that country. But just because there are a lot of competitors, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't work in that country, but it does mean that we need to know how to prepare ourselves to be better than that organization. If we're going to take that segment of the market from them and be the best research firm in that place, then we need to know what we have as an advantage, disadvantage, things we can work on. So that's very important.
So for the first block where we analyze the market, so one of the big components there would be the analysis of the competition. So strengths, weaknesses, how Forcier is different or similar or better or worse than the competitors. So it sounds like that's what the company wants you to spend most of the attention on in that particular block.
Yep. And also, keep in mind, we often compete against individuals. So, I don't want you to think, Forcier, we are a small business, especially compared to a lot of the other X-Culture competitors. We are a global business. We're a multi-million-dollar multinational business, but we're still comparatively small, especially for the space that we work in. So while many of our competitors are large research organizations, maybe you've heard of Pew, maybe you've heard of Gallup, they're taking on contracts that are in the multi-million dollars. We're doing projects that are in the thousands of dollars. The reason that we've done 450 projects in the last 6 years is because these projects are very small. They can be for 3 weeks and they can be for $10,000. They could be for 2 months, and they could be for $30,000. We also do multi-year, multi-million monitoring projects, but very less than those. So our bread and butter, what makes Forcier unique, is the size of project that we go for. Traditionally, the people that are bidding on these kinds of projects are actually individual consultants. They're just one person. So the advantage that Forcier often has is we are going against individuals who may be very qualified in the sector, maybe they're agricultural experts, but Forcier, we get to bring the quality assurance mechanisms, the support, the finance, the analysis, all of this research expertise of a global firm, and we're going up against individuals. So a lot of the times we work with universities and their professors, both as partners and research staff, so they work with us as technical advisors, but oftentimes we're actually going up against them, and individual professors from local universities are the ones that are bidding against us. So something to consider. It's not just big international firms. It's not just small local firms. It's individuals. And I just want you to just remember our size is very important, because a lot of the people said one of your competitors, is the World Bank. Like, we will never compete with the World Bank. We're not trying to be the World Bank.
And then one more question that several students asked, and I, as a professor who wishes them well, needs to ask: what are the chances, or what would it take to impress you enough to maybe have an opportunity of an internship, or maybe even a job at Forcier? If somebody did a wonderful job, conducted a survey and brought you some interesting ideas that you never considered, and presented it in a very professional, nice way, would you be open to the idea of having some sort of an employer-employee relationship with that student?
Absolutely. Let's take, I will speak for myself and my role in Forcier. My department, business development, we have business development officers, junior business development officers, and managers. They're in all of our countries. We have a team of about 11 right now. They work, again, in all of our offices. Those are the people that are writing proposals on a day-to-day basis. They're communicating with clients. They're doing this market research. They're the ones that are leading our efforts based on regional pods, we call them, to win work. I would be extremely open. Imagine the time that it saves me to find someone that has already spent a semester learning about our industry, learning about our company. They come into this role already having all that background knowledge. That's extremely useful to me, as well as someone that is interested in expanding the market and learning about business and getting business. So from my side, there are many different kind of opportunities that I would be extremely interested in working with ex-culture students on. Keep in mind, they would be internationally based. So any opportunity that we have would right now be in Africa. So you would have to be willing to, live in these locations, which is not for everyone, and something to absolutely think on.
Actually, the questions that came, it seems like at least a couple of students are interested in going into those interesting places.
That's great.
For experience, for adventure, perhaps even.
Yeah. So we love it. Forcier is an extremely unique company. It takes a unique type of person to want to live in a compound in Somalia and do research and write proposals. A little bit of crazy, a little bit of adventure, a real love of data and work. So what impresses me, I will say I am an extremely aesthetically focused person. When it comes to work, I am so keen on spelling, formatting. Does it look nice? What I always say is, when you write a proposal for a client, your proposal is an indication of your final product. If your proposal looks like crap, they're not going to think you're going to do a good job on the project. You need to present something that is what we call client ready. That's a classic consulting kind of term. So if you submit a report to and this is something you should just keep in mind for schooling or your life in general, if you're submitting anything to someone, it should be as finished as possible. And what I will look at is formatting. If there are spelling mistakes, if there's horrendous font, if spacing is all off, I won't be impressed. So
I would add to that it's especially, first, it's a very, very important tip. And I would say 10 times if I had the time. But one of the reasons it's even more important in the context of ex-culture is that each company, especially a company like Forcier that tends to be more popular, will be receiving multiple submissions. And we are talking about maybe 50, maybe 100, maybe even 200, 300 reports. We have almost 1,000 teams, and some companies will be having hundreds of teams working on it. And so when you print all those reports, and I have done it many times, we're talking about like this much paper, right? And so when you have this much paper, each report looks roughly like this, this thick. The client, in this case, for example, Ian Sandler or whoever else reads it, or the instructor for that matter, has to look through many of them at the same time, dozens or even hundreds. And so obviously the client doesn't have the time, like physically doesn't have the time to read every word of your report and understand every little idea you have there. So in many cases, they would open the report, look at the title page, and subconsciously, it's not that they're bad and they just don't want to read the report. It's just when you have to process so much information, subconsciously you look at the quality of the formatting. If it looks like, as Ian said, if it looks like crap, all of a sudden your brain says, well, probably there is nothing interesting inside of it. And so it will go directly to the recycling bin, or maybe will not be, you know, read as carefully. And so it's not that people want to dismiss your work just because it has typos. It's just when you have to process so much information, you have to take, you know, those shortcuts. And so you don't want to disqualify yourself essentially from the competition by presenting the work that is not readable, that is not pleasing to the eye. So take the time, you know, to do it right as far as the formatting, and then only then you will have the chance that your potential employer, that your potential funder, that your professor will actually read the ideas and evaluate them for their quality. So
it's the same as a resume. You know, when you get a resume, if you see spelling errors, you know, the average resume only is like 8 seconds or something of looking at it. You do it quick. You have to evaluate. Why would I trust the content of your report if you don't have the spelling of the company name right? And the other thing that I would say in terms of the reports is logical flow. So, you know, I want to see a narrative. You need to paint me a picture. You know, consider this as business students. This is a business case, and you're trying to sell me on why it should be this market. If it's a bunch of different information in random places that doesn't really correlate, I'm not going to follow why this is a good market. If you are painting a narrative of, you know, there's no competition, there are lots of clients, the costs are cheap, and you're showing me why one thing leads to the next, as I read, I'm going, oh yeah, and I'm connecting the dots. So a narrative is incredibly important. And again, that is extremely important in our proposals that we write as well. So if you were ever to have an opportunity at Forcier, these are the things that are most important in the proposal. Can you provide a narrative that shows the logical flow of what you're selling and how everything connects rather than jumbled pieces? So, you know, you need to convince me with a story.
Right. And so this same advice applies to all the companies that participate in X-Culture this semester. We have 10 of them, aimed for 5, but there were so many interesting companies, so it's 10 this semester. This advice goes for all of them. So you want to present a narrative, you want to present it well, and you want to convince the company of your value. What's good about this is that when you interview for a job in a kind of regular marketplace, in many cases, the employer will only look at your resume and maybe will ask questions like, oh, tell me about a case or an instance when you had to go above and beyond, or, you know, when you did something. So kind of general questions, and it's almost impossible to differentiate yourself from all the other applicants because everybody's telling those, you know, stories, and they are largely irrelevant to the job itself. Here you have an opportunity to do actually something that is very similar to what you would be doing at this company if you were to get the job. So you can go beyond that superficial stuff and show the company that, yes, see, I can write, I can do research, I can find opportunities that maybe you didn't know about. So if you are interested in either getting a job at this company or just training for getting a job somewhere else down the road, this is a wonderful, perfect, essentially time machine, because it will not be any different when you're shopping for a real job, because what you will learn here, that's what will apply in the future.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of desk research. The internet is a large and vast collection of information. You can find so much on the internet. Do not give up after the first Google and the first page. Change up your keywords, look in different places, look in different pages, you know, follow down the rabbit hole of information. A ton of what we do in our jobs is desk research. You know, secondary sources for research can often be just as important as first, you know, primary data collection. So do not underestimate what you can find on the internet. Don't give up if it doesn't come up at first. Ask around, really be creative with where you look on the internet and the resources that you use.
Right. Yeah, and one more thing that for some reason didn't occur to me earlier, but related to X-Culture and to you. In 4 weeks, we have the X-Culture Symposium in Washington, D.C., the same one that we had last year in Florida and then in Mexico. This year just happens to be in Washington, D.C. Do you think it would be possible to invite you to organize a session for our students? First, we'll have about 50 students from something like 30 countries attending the event, but also we will have, as usual, about 400, 500 professors from all around the world. And I know the session that you organized last year on business, doing business in Africa, was very popular. I know it's not related to this particular challenge and the students who are watching now, but it just occurred to me that you are right there. Would it be possible?
Let me check. Do you know the dates of it?
26, 29 of this month.
I think I will be out of town, unfortunately. If it's the 29th, I'm pretty sure I will be out of town. But yeah, let me check
the information. So if you happen to be around, you know, we would be very, very happy to incorporate you in the program, maybe for a session, or maybe just to meet with the students quickly, whatever your schedule allows. I know you're busy, but if you could spare an hour for us, just
absolutely. Yeah, let's connect offline. We'll see what we can do there. No problem.
All right, well, thank you so much. We are out of time. We have a few more questions here, but we will try then to forward them by email to the company and hopefully receive the answers and add them to the frequently asked questions database. There are a number of personal questions that for some reason you always get, like, for example, are you married and stuff like that. I'm not sure if it's professional to ask. Most of the last webinars, you answered those questions before. Yes,
no problem. I am not married, but I do have a girlfriend. People at Forcier, there's an interesting mix. I mean, I would say the vast majority of staff are not married because you are spending an extended period of time away from home. We're extremely dedicated to our work. You know, we work a lot. We're a young company. So there's a mix of people.
But wouldn't you say that all this travel to all those exotic places, it's a sort of a combination of work and life balance? Because I assume your trips are not just boring trips to Hilton Hotel in Atlanta. I mean, that's much more, I assume.
You know, you'll be surprised. A lot of the times I'm at just another hotel in Malawi. It's the same thing as a hotel in Atlanta, just with, you know, a little worse service and worse electricity.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So we're going to stop here. We're out of time. Thank you all who were watching the webinar. We had up to 90 people at different times. Next time, feel free to join us live and ask your questions. And thank you for all the emails that you sent to us. And we will try to do another webinar in November. But that time, the focus will be on you talking to the company. So we will allow or select 3, 4 maybe presenters or teams. And what we will ask to do them at that time is to present to the company what they have at that time. And then the company will, instead of talking, will listen and then maybe provide some feedback. So in the remaining weeks, you have the opportunity to use that feedback and improve your work before you actually submit it. So we'll do it in about a month, month and a half.
Sounds great. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Okay.